Hi, everyone. Welcome back. It's been a little while since we've seen you all virtually, so thank you for joining us for a virtual fireside chat with Marie-Justine Labelle, Head of Responsible Investment at Desjardins Investments, for a discussion tackling all things money, investing, and social responsibility. Marie-Justine is passionate about helping investors do well and do good at the same time, meaning achieve positive outcomes financially and for the planet and people. She believes investing will play a pivotal role in addressing environmental and social issues in the next decades. So on to some quick housekeeping notes before we get started. Please make sure to ask your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll open up an audience Q&A at the very end of this hour. Now I'd like to introduce our host, Jason Magnoy, Head of Business Development at St. Joseph Media, and the new Associate Publisher at Canadian Business. Thank you both so much for your time today, and take it away, Jason.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Chantal, and welcome, Marie-Justine. I'm very excited to be chatting with you today. So it's been, like Chantal said, it's actually been a while since we've done one of these. It's been weeks. So we're very excited to sort of dive into it again and talk about investing. It's funny because I literally just had a baby 5 weeks ago. So I'm very interested in the world.
Congrats.
So I'm interested in the world. I want to make sure that it's going to be a great world for my son. But before we dive in, my first question is, how are you and how have you been holding up during the pandemic?
Hi, and great to be here. Thanks for having me. I've been doing good. So obviously the pandemic was hard. It's brought some hard times. But I was lucky enough to stay healthy, and everyone around me stayed healthy, keep job security. So I felt very grateful for that. And well, when life brings you lemons, make lemonade. So I didn't make lemonade, but I made a lot of baking goods.
Yeah, amazing. So tell us more about your career. How did you end up at Desjardins?
Yeah, sure. So should we start from the start?
Start.
Okay, so I can't say that I was someone that had like a clear vision for what I wanted to do when I was younger. But I knew that I wanted to have a job that, felt purposeful to me. And I was really interested in environmental and social issues. So I went and studied that. And then after university, it was like, okay, how do I translate this into a real job? So I did a lot of thinking and decided to become a sustainability consultant because I wanted to see a lot of things, but I knew I was really interested in sustainability. And I think once you figure out that first move, the rest kind of follows. So I started that job, and within like 6 months, I had my first mandate on finance, on responsible investing, actually. And I got really excited about it. And, I had never even thought about finance before, but I just found it super interesting and great kind of levers for impact. So I kind of stuck with it and decided to focus, stayed in consulting, but decided to focus on that for a few years. And then I actually was working in London in the UK for 7 years. And last year I thought, okay, it's time to come home to Canada. I was excited to come home. And then Desjardins was just like an obvious fit because they're the biggest financial cooperative in North America. And they were created out of mission to enrich the lives of people and of communities. They have really kind of financial inclusion at the heart of their mission. So there was like this clear values alignment. And I was really excited to have this opportunity to come work with them on responsible investing.
So my next question then is, so how are millennials investing differently than past generations? Are we all just investing in crypto?
So no, we're not all just investing in crypto, which is really good news because that would be very not diversified portfolios, and that would be a bad thing. But more generally, how are millennials investing? I would say that millennials invest with their heart. So they have these values, environmental and social values, and they don't compartmentalize them in like one aspect of their lives. They're really keen to have them reflected in all aspects of their lives, like their personal life, but also their work life and their investments as well. And I think that's why they've really been the ones driving the responsible investment revolution. They do invest in sustainable investments at twice the average rate. So that's a really big thing. Another thing is I think that millennials, maybe more so than other generations, just instinctively get that, you know, responsible investing is the right thing to do, but it also makes financial sense. So they, you know, they've seen kind of like environmental and social damage and what it means for the economy. They're kind of seeing it. So they kind of know that, you know, when you add that layer of insight into the way that you invest, you're bound to make better financial decisions. And I think they just get it. And when I say they, I mean we, because I'm also a millennial.
Well, I mean, that actually is my next question. It's tied to that, which was just the pandemic and the impact that it's had on investing habits and needs. So what have you noticed as a trend?
Yeah, well, obviously, like there's been like two situations for people. There were the ones that, you know, kept their job, had more time to think about saving, were spending less, so had more to save. And then there was a more unfortunate situation where people, you know, maybe lost their job or had more financial insecurity. But what seems to come out in both situations is that people want to be more disciplined in their finances. They don't want to be caught off guard, and they want to think more long-term and saving for retirement. So that seems to be a big takeaway. Another thing I would say is that that they say that you don't really know who you are as an investor until you've experienced your first market crash. So, you know, the pandemic and, you know, the market crisis was that first experience for a lot of millennials. And I think a lot of people went through the route of GameStop style, kind of going all in and like some equities because they read about it on Reddit. But I think hopefully like the lesson from the pandemic was just like, you know, find like investments that work for you and just keep still and just go for a diversified portfolio and just let the magic of compounding do its work and just think long term about your investments the same way you would expect companies to think long term about their business. So I think that was another takeaway.
That's a really good segue into my next question, which is basically like, is it like you'd mentioned sort of two different buckets of young people and what they experienced during the pandemic. But overall, the economy still seems to be pretty precarious. Like, is it a good idea for young people to invest when the economy is like that, or is there no good time, or is it the best time ever to invest right now?
Well, they do say like buy low, sell high. But I mean, I also like another big thing is that you can't time the market. Like even professionals like really struggle and can't really time the market. So it's always a good time. Like a better time to invest today would be to invest yesterday, right? So like just invest when you can. And I do think that was one of the takeaways, to just say, okay, just gonna get started, even if it's just $20 a month that I can put in saving. That's just going to add up and it's going to compound over time, right?
I mean, that idea of value sort of becoming a huge part of people's identities, and then now they live their values everywhere, socially, at work, through their investments. So I guess my question is, you know, now that it's a huge part of our identity, I don't actually know what responsible investing is. So can you tell us, like, what is it? How is it different than regular investing, and why does it matter?
Yes, of course. So, okay, first of all, what is responsible investing? So it takes many different shapes or forms, but at the core of it, the idea is that you take into consideration environmental, social, corporate governance issues in the way that you invest. And then you can think about it as a spectrum. I guess to simplify it is that there's some approaches, you know, on the first end of the spectrum that are more still kind of purely thinking about it from a financial point of view, that considering these issues and how they're material to different kind of sectors or regions will give you that added insight, which means you'll better manage risk in your portfolio. And then at the other end of the spectrum is the idea that you want to invest in investments that are making like a tangible additional contribution on the ground to kind of positive environmental and social outcomes. And I should say, I mean, this isn't necessarily in contradiction. You can do both at the same time. And I should also say it's a field that's constantly evolving. But that just gives an idea, I guess, for listeners.
I mean, I'm not even sure if this is well, it is a misconception, because I had it when I entered even this interview with you, but I just assumed that, like, in terms of types of investments, that the powerful oil company or Amazon would just do better than a company that cares about sustainability. Is that true? And if it isn't true, like, how do I do this now? Like, how do I invest responsibly? How do I make sure that my money is supporting businesses that are making an impact environmentally, for example, in the country?
Yeah, so many questions. And I just realized I didn't answer to your kind of previous question about why it matters, because that's such an important one. So first of all, like, why does responsible investment matters to me is because it's a really powerful way for individuals to use their voice. It's like a big part of their lives where they can just say, like, this is what I stand for, this is what I expect from, you know, financial institutions, from companies, from governments. Like, I expect a financial system that, you know, gives me kind of financial security, but also holds companies accountable for their behavior, and gives me like a financial system and an economy that in the future I'm going to be able to live in, that's going to be prosperous enough and like socially and environmentally healthy enough that I can live in. And I do think a lot of people think that, you know, just their own individual voice like won't make a difference, but these voices really add up and they send a powerful message. And, you know, as I said, responsible investing, you know, isn't perfect right now. Like, we constantly want to improve what we can put out there for retail investors, but having that voice and hearing it really gives us the leverage to constantly improve and see that it's important for investors. So I just wanted to kind of say that's why it's really important. And then you had a question on kind of the performance of responsible investment. So, I mean, this is kind of a myth that is like perduring for like some reason, but I mean, especially now that we have kind of a track record, some of these, we have some products in responsible investment products in asset classes, you know, that have been around for at least 5 years, 10 years, that we can really see, like, the more time goes by, the more we have that track record, the more we can say with certainty that responsible investment, you know, performs on par or better than traditional investment. So, you know, I would say that's case closed, but it's good to ask the question because, you know, it does come up time and again. And I think some people might be scared of responsible investment and they think, oh, surely it must make less money. But the point is really not about, you know, making that part less important. We recognize that people have financial goals. It's just making their money matter at the same time.
And you mentioned, and I love that word, accountability, and like it's a really great way to make businesses accountable. I guess my question is, how do you assess what is actually a responsible investment? Like, how do you break through the marketing and really assess impact?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really important question. It's a tough one because responsible investment is such a trend now that, you know, every financial institution has responsible investment, has responsible investment marketing. So it can be really hard to cut through the noise. To me, I would say that the first thing that I would look at is the organization. Like, more generally, is that organization like in who they are as an organization, their mission, their corporate culture that, you know, they're showing? Can you believe that they have a genuine commitment to this agenda? In the actions that they've taken in the past, in what they've already done, can you see that? In some controversies that they've been involved in, like how can you assess, like, is this an organization I can trust to try to bring me kind of genuinely good responsible investment products? So that's for the organization. And then you can look into the product itself. So for example, like every responsible investment product will have like a fact sheet that's publicly available online. You can go have a look at the holdings and just think the top holdings and just think, are these the kind of companies that I want to be exposed to, for example? Does that product have a track record? You know, if it's been around for 5 years, chances are that, you know, there's a bit more expertise there and continuous improvement that's already taken place. And the last thing is to look at reporting. So, you know, a lot of financial institutions will have, for example, an annual report on responsible investment. Well, we definitely have one where we try to report on the progress, the way, you know, we tackle some issues, examples of some wins, and we try to report progress on trying to influence on the ground positive outcomes.
I mean, when it comes to sort of like one of the things that I'm noticing as a trend also for millennials is that, you know, for a lot of people, it is their first foray into investing. So a lot of the value proposition is it's super easy to do, like sign up and it's quick and it's easy. This sounds like there's more due diligence required in this type of investing. Is it easy to do? Like, can I start today? Like if I walked into Desjardins and I was like, I want to do this, what would you say to me? Like, can I start right away? Is it fast?
Yeah, well, I mean, at Desjardins, we definitely have like a full product line, so it is super easy. But more generally, I think like the same applies as to traditional investment, right? You could go online and just buy any product and not really do diligence, or you could really do your work, think about, you know, what are your needs as an investor, where you think, you know, there's going to be kind of good opportunities, what's the best provider. So it's a bit the same for responsible investment. You could just get any product out there, but there are varying quality. But I would definitely do that minimum of just looking a bit under the hood. So I definitely think the first step is to look at the organization and to think, you know, is this an organization that I trust to, you know, really believe in responsible investing and try to continuously provide me with the best products, because it's a market that's in constant evolution. I think what's most important is that you work with like a long-term partner that will, you know, help you evolve through that market. I think that's the first thing, but I do think it's important to just dip your toes, because, and that applies to just investing, retail investing in general. You know, we can get a bit lethargic about taking care of our finances or, you know, making some changes. So I think just, you know, dipping your toes and seeing it as the first step of the journey rather than like the end goal. And then from there, continuing to learn, asking questions to your financial advisor, and like asking for accountability as well. And then from there, learning more about responsible investment. And then you'll learn more about what are your personal preferences and what's more fit for you.
My next question then is, and it's a bridge from this idea of making things easier, but how is technology going to change the way we invest? Like, I have this vision in the future where it's like it's all going to be robots carrying NFTs to the bank or something really strange like that. So how will technology change the way we invest, and does technology make it easier to responsibly invest?
I definitely think so. So I think, you know, another, I guess, kind of myth is that millennials, like they don't want to like talk to a financial advisor. They just want to go and do their thing online, use like technology and digital platforms, which to a certain extent is true. They are more interested in these solutions. But what we see is that actually most millennials want to talk to someone, or they want like a hybrid model where they, you know, get to autonomously look through the digital platforms at what the options are, and then talk to a professional about it. So in a way, it might change less the way we invest than we think. But what I get excited about technology and investing is the way that it can help accelerate kind of the evolution of responsible investing. And I do have a few examples in mind. So for example, environmental, social, and governance data, so we call it ESG data. There's still a lot of companies for which we don't have appropriate data on their environmental and social practices, or that it's not like in a format that's digestible if you have, how many companies in your portfolio. So definitely using, for example, artificial intelligence to kind of better estimate or access or, consume that data is really exciting. That's one thing. Another thing is, and that's just really in the early days, but it's the idea of getting retail investors more like closer to their investments and closer to like what it actually looks like in practice. So for example, there was a trial that an asset manager did in Europe recently, where they really kind of started a dialogue with the investors on the issues that were more important to them, and using a digital platform to do that, and doing it more in a kind of live way and in a way that would directly kind of impact the voting decisions that the asset managers would make at the company. So like, I do think there's going to be a lot of development on that in the next decade in terms of getting people a lot closer to their investments. That's one thing. And I mean, there's so many examples. I think another thing is getting kind of impactful investments that sometimes are not accessible to retail investors, to like everyday retail investors, using technology and innovation to make them more accessible so that these retail investors have access to like more impactful investment opportunities. So I think it's a really exciting time to be working in this space.
And in terms of just the overall industry, how much like is responsible investing still really small and emerging, or how many people are actually doing this right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy when you look at the statistics, like how much it's grown exponentially over the last decade. And there are some stats from the Responsible Investment Association of Canada saying that, it represents something like half of the assets managed in Canada right now. And, that's a mix of kind of retail assets and institutional assets, but it just goes to show. And I think what we're seeing is that assets are moving towards like a more responsible way of investing, and they're kind of going through that spectrum that I described at the beginning. So some assets that were, managed completely like in a traditional way, now they're starting to kind of integrate environmental and social consideration because they recognize it affects financial performance. And then the ones that were already doing that, they're looking for ways to make those investments more impactful. So I think we'll continue to see kind of money going through that journey, I guess.
Well, we're actually, so if you have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A chat box. We actually have a fair number of them, so I'm going to jump right into the questions.
Okay.
So Joseph has a question here. It's explain, how do you do due diligence of potential investments for greenwashing?
Yeah. So for example, like at Desjardins, we have a team that develops investment products. So we think, okay, there's a need for clients to have that kind of product. And then we go out there and we find the best asset manager that will do that job. So we have like a very extensive manager selection process where we look in detail at their own processes for environmental and social due diligence. And we ask them questions like, how do you look at issues like environmental issues like climate change and biodiversity and social issues, diversity and inclusion, for example, in these companies? How do they affect your decision to invest in them or not? And then once you've decided to invest or not, how do you keep engaging with that company so that they improve their practices? So you can see it like a waterfall where we put that, I guess, pressure, or I should say, like we work hand in hand with these asset managers. We select the best ones out there that have the most relevant experience and expertise and that have a common commitment to ESG. And then in turn, they do that to companies. And there's definitely been times, for example, where we had a diversity mandate. So we wanted a mandate that was really focusing on making sure that that there were kind of diverse boards on companies and management teams on companies. And we had an asset manager that I guess kind of interviewed for the job. And we asked them about their own board. And they were like, no, it's not very diverse, but we tried, but we don't think women are really interested in these positions. And we were just like, okay, well, clearly you're not fit for the job. So that's just an example of how it kind of translated in practice.
A question from Kim. How do you assess companies' behaviors appropriately since there are no standards to compare across entities? Companies can cherry pick what they disclose to appeal to investors.
Yeah, I mean, there's no standards to compare across entities, but like if you start looking in one sector, sometimes you might have a sectoral standard, or you like often, as I say, but we're kind of one step removed, but there will be sectoral specialists. And, especially for our responsible investment funds, we expect them to have training in the environmental and social considerations for that sector. So they will know what the material issues are, and they have this dialogue with companies to understand how they're dealing with this issue. But standards is an issue, so is data, but that's another thing that there's a lot of developments out there to have more standardized data on environmental and social performance of companies so that it is easier to compare.
A question from Rob. Are there particular asset classes, products that are performing admirably and setting a high bar for responsibility?
So in terms of asset classes, you have different levers depending on just what that asset class is. I'd say that responsible investing started mostly with equities. And that's just, I guess there's a longer track record in kind of figuring out how to do responsible investing in equities. And that's like an example of where you do have shareholder engagement, where you can have dialogue with companies. You could submit shareholder propositions to the management. You could use proxy voting to make your convictions known to that company. So I mean, that's an example of one that's there's been a lot of work done for a long time. Having said that, I mean, people have been thinking about how do you apply that to other asset classes. In fixed income, there's green bonds, where there's emerging standards on how to help investors identify bonds that invest in kind of green activities. There's also initiatives. For example, there's a recent initiative from investors to think about what shareholder engagement would look like, but talking to governments about their kind of sovereign fixed income. So, how do investors come together to engage with governments about their own practices? So, yeah, I would say I would definitely take each asset class as its own and look what best practice looks like there. In terms of products, it depends. Once again, there's products where there's more levers for impact. There's definitely kind of impact investing that, there's, I guess, this added willingness to make a tangible additional contribution on the ground. But once again, it's important to know that there's no standardized definition. You can use the word impact as you see fit, but it's really trying to understand how are these investments making kind of or the way they're managed, making a difference that wouldn't have happened otherwise. I think that's the big question.
This is another question from the audience, which is, do you believe the criteria that determines which companies are considered ESGs is accurate? Can we trust big banks to determine which companies qualify?
Yeah, so, as some listeners may know, there's a lot of reliance on ESG ratings right now on the market. So these are kind of third-party data providers that, look at the environmental, social, and governance performance of companies, and they kind of score them, and then they end up with an aggregate score to say, this is how well that company performs on ESG. But obviously there's a lot of work gone into these ratings, but there's a lot of inevitably like shortcuts in the sense that, first of all, you can get like an ESG performance rating, but that doesn't say, you know, are you performing really badly on the E and really well on the S? And then that just means you get an okay score. So, you know, that's an example. Another example is that there's many different ESG rating providers out there. And they sometimes have very different ratings for the same company. The correlation between these different ratings is like something like, sometimes it's as low as like 60%. So kind of barely correlated. So I think once again, like this is a place where there's increasing standardization, but definitely one that needs, I guess, improvement.
Question from Grant. Are there responsible investment products that produce predictable revenue streams for older clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that's important to know about responsible investment is that, you know, if you see one thing that an investor will do is work with their financial advisor, for example, and determine what their profile is and what their kind of investing needs are, depending on its own situation, its risk tolerance, its age, etc. And then that will determine like a certain kind of asset class mix, for example, that will be relevant for them. And then usually there will be both traditional and responsible investment products that fit that profile. So I definitely wouldn't see kind of responsible investment products as something that are only appropriate for kind of specific investors. It's more, there is something appropriate for everyone. And it's just about figuring that out first and then seeing what is out there for you, depending on your profile. And that's definitely something that we pride ourselves on at Desjardins, is that we have like a very complete suite of offerings so that we have something that fits everyone's needs.
Another question from Rob. What role do you feel ETFs play in responsible investing?
Good question. So ETFs are obviously becoming like increasingly popular because they offer a lot of flexibility. You know, so a lot of ETFs are kind of managed passively, and that also means that there's maybe less kind of levers for influencing companies and just, you know, just playing a more, you know, active and thoughtful role, like in those companies' practices. So that's just something to be mindful about. Another thing to be mindful about is that, as I said, responsible investing is a spectrum, right? So, you know, there's kind of the risk management focused angle. So ETFs can do that in a way. They can kind of remove your exposure from in the way they will be structured from kind of, I guess, riskier companies. But in terms of getting to the more ambitious spectrum, where you definitely try to make kind of, you know, influence positive outcomes on the ground, that might be a bit harder to do for ETFs right now anyway.
So it's almost like if you're an ETF and you want to get into sort of responsible, is responsible more advanced in a way? Like you have to be more advanced in your thinking to participate, or am I just wrong there and I made an incorrect assumption?
Not necessarily. I guess it's more that like they're you know, some ETFs are actively managed, but a lot of them are passively managed, which just means that you kind of follow like a basket of companies that have already been kind of determined. And then if you have less flexibility to diverge from that, then that might just mean you have a bit less flexibility to make decisions that you think are better for increased responsibility in the portfolio.
Yeah. Well, my next question then is, so what is next for you and what is next for Desjardins?
Yeah, so I mean, really exciting times because, as you know, responsible investment is booming. And we've been doing responsible investment for 30 years, but we do want to constantly improve. So we've just developed like a 3-year roadmap on how we want to build upon what we already have. And we want to keep contributing to the discussion in the industry and beyond on how we can, as an industry, kind of bring responsible investment to the next level. So I'm not going to spoil all the surprises for the next few years, but there's definitely some aspects, for example, on climate change. So obviously climate change, is a fundamental issue and one that's really important to our investors, well, to our members and clients that invest in our products. So Desjardins has made like a commitment to be net zero over the next decades. So we want to see how we can apply that to the investment products that we have, and offer solutions for members and clients that also believe that they want to see the Paris Agreement be respected, and how we can translate that in our investment products. So that's just one example.
I mean, one thing that I've been noticing about businesses in general is that they're all even big businesses, small, they all seem to care. Like they all care about climate change, they all care about diversity, race relations, etc. So is the trajectory of our economy going to be that every company is responsible and just participating in the economy will be responsible investing?
I mean, that would be great. I hope it's the case. But I do think in practice, like you do see in each sector, there's kind of leaders and laggards. And the reality is that's probably going to continue. I think, if we think, for example, 5 years ago, there was Climate Action 100 Plus that was created, and that's like a collaborative shareholder engagement platform to engage with the worst GHG emitters. And some of them have responded positively, some of them 5 years in, despite everything that we see on climate change, aren't really moving or nowhere fast enough. So I think the reality is that, hopefully, I do think, we do see in the economy, there is a trend towards more environmental and socially sound practices, but we can't assume that will be the case. We'll have to keep pushing hard.
And that goes right back to that idea of accountability. And this is actually an incredible way to hold organizations accountable, which actually this takes me to, so we really zoomed through this. It's amazing. Went through the audience questions, got through all I'm thrilled. But my final question before we break today is, so what is the first thing you're going to do after the pandemic ends?
So you know what, for me, the pandemic was really kind of forced me to kind of slow down and, be more mindful in connecting with my close ones and having kind of a well-being routine. So I really hope that I keep those good habits in place. But I definitely want, so as I said, I was living in the UK for a few years. I've just come back. So I really hope to get to travel Canada more and get to see, its hidden treasures.
Amazing. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to change my portfolio and make it more responsible. That's what I'm going to do.
Because your toes.
Well, that's the thing. I think one of the things that we've seen is that, man, like the world is just really, really different. And we really want to, we have to invest in organizations that are basically helping and investing in the world. And I would love to be able to do that. So thank you so much for joining us today. This was a wonderful discussion. Thank you to everyone for joining us for this Fireside Chat. But please stay tuned. We have more coming up. But if you have any questions, please let us know. We can pass them on to the team at Desjardins. But we look forward to hosting you again. We look forward to seeing you at the next one. But everyone, stay safe. Have a great day. And bye for now.
Thank you for having me. It was great to be here.